Welcome to Regulatory Ramblings. Our podcast today is brought to you by the University of Hong Kong's RegTech Lab, the HKU SCF FinTech Academy, the Asia Global Institute, and the HKU edX Professional Certificate in FinTech, with support from the university's Faculty of Law. I'm your host, Ajay Shandasani. Our first guest in what we'll be calling Regulatory Rambling Spotlight moving forwards has been here before, Dr. Oriol Caudevilla Paralida. Following that, we'll be chatting with former Dutch Marine, Iraq War veteran, and master linguist Skip Schiphorst about his penchant for languages and doing online open source research in languages other than English, especially Russian, Arabic, and Mandarin Chinese, and how English isn't necessarily the easiest language to search in. But first, much has been written and said about the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, known in mainland China as the One Belt, One Road Plan, and sometimes referred to as the New Silk Road. It's a global infrastructure development strategy adopted by the government of the People's Republic of China in 2013 to invest in more than 150 countries and international organizations. The BRI is composed of 6 urban development land corridors linked by road, rail, energy, and digital infrastructure in the Maritime Silk Road linked by the development of ports. The idea was simple enough: transport raw materials to China while carrying China's manufactured wares to participating nations. Yet, our guest today suggests that there is a green side to the BRI that few have acknowledged. Oriol is a highly regarded voice on all things crypto and fintech. He's an honorary fellow at HKU's Asian Institute of International Financial Law. He also works as a board director and co-leader of the Financial Inclusion and CBDC's working groups at the Global Impact FinTech Gift Forum, and is chairman of the Private Digital Euro Working Group at the Digital Euro Association. He's published articles and been cited by the international media outlets of numerous renown, such as Reuters, Forbes, Middle East, South China Morning Post here in Hong Kong, Outlook India, China Daily, Asian Investor, Forecast News, and Cointelegraph, just to name a few. In addition, for the past year or so, he has hosted the Digital Tomorrow podcast. Oriol, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me again. It's a pleasure. We had the pleasure of discussing CBDCs, the electronic Hong Kong dollar, and digital yuan in the past, and it's great to be here with you today discussing these different but very interesting topics.
What leaps out at me at your proposition was that, what do you mean by the concept of a green Belt and Road Initiative? I mean, it seems almost counterintuitive, because either way you slice it, China's goods are going to other countries along the New Silk Road. China's bringing back resources to feed its consumption. You're talking about vast amounts of carbon and energy that are being used up, that are being expended to carry these resources towards China and goods from it. Can the Belt and Road Initiative ever truly be green?
Well, that's actually a very good question. I mean, on the one hand, as you said before, you have this Belt and Road Initiative, also known as One Belt, One Road, which recently turned 11 years old. And as you said before, the idea is to precisely to promote the connectivity of not just China with those countries, but in general of those Asian, European, African countries, even though we must say that where it's been most successful has been in Central Asia, in Africa. But when you look at that, it is true that you may think that regardless of how successful it's been from the infrastructure standpoint, the idea that strikes is that maybe this is somewhat opposed to the idea of being green. But then when you look at this topic more closely, you realize that there's more to it than that. Because that's precisely the key idea here, to reduce the negative environmental impact of all this investment, an investment that, as you said, per se, could be bad from an environmental standpoint. And this is why China has been working towards this idea of the Green Silk Road. That's a topic that I've covered in some research in the past, including an article I wrote for China Daily. I think it was like maybe half a year ago or so. In order, for example, to kind of promote this Green Silk Road, China launched the Green Belt and Road initiative with the BRI, International Green Development Coalition, BRIGC, for example, which was jointly initiated by the Ministry of Ecology and Environment of China and international partners. And the idea was for China to work with all parties to support this, to play a more important role in advancing towards high quality Belt and Road development. And actually, the idea of making the Belt and Road greener, I think it's consistent with China's goals in general. When I say in general, I mean when it comes to promoting green finance, carbon neutrality, etc. These are topics quite crucial for China, because I mean, if we look at this from a narrow angle, the Green Silk Road, as I said before, is consistent with China becoming greener, given that China is trying to reduce its dependence on coal, which to some extent could be somewhat ironic, because 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago, when you try to analyze who was trying to champion, carbon, the reduction of the carbon footprint, etc. Well, I mean, I would say, and I may be wrong, but I would say that maybe until 10 or even 15 years ago, there was a huge gap between China and Western countries, the US. But now, you know that with Trump, for example, the US has left again the Paris Agreement, the Paris Treaty, when it comes to these areas. And then China, I would say that 10, 11, 12 years ago started to become much more concerned about the environment, about how to take care of it. And this is why one of China's goals is precisely to reduce its dependence on coal. As you know, China's goal is that of reaching its carbon emissions peak by 2030, so that is in 5 years from now, and becoming carbon neutral before 2060. And this is something actually that I'm not making up. This was listed in China's 14th five-year plan, the one which covers 2021 until 2025, also called China's 14th five-year plan for national economic and social development and the long-range objectives through the year 2035. And these objectives that China has are crucial for achieving a green development. And I think what's also important as well, just as a way of comparison, is that the United States and the European Union aim to achieve this carbon neutrality by 2050. So if you look only at the target year, you would say, oh, okay, I mean, the European Union and the US will reach that neutrality before China. But the thing is that if they meet their targets on time, it will have taken the US around 45 years and the European Union around 60 years to move from their carbon emissions peak to achieve neutrality. But China, as I said before, is planning to doing so in just 30 years, from 2030, which is going to be in theory the carbon emissions peak, until 2060, which is where they aim to become carbon neutral, which is, as experts said, an ambitious yet reachable goal. So I think all that needs to be put into perspective, because we cannot understand China's Green Silk Road or their intention to make the Silk Road greener if we do not understand, or if we do not put this into the wider picture of China trying to achieve carbon neutrality, or also China trying to promote green finance, or even blue finance, for example. Because about green finance, for example, as well, I published some articles as well about this topic. You know that Hong Kong has tried to push intensely when it comes to issuing green bonds, and then blue finance as well. It's a kind of a new area. And going back to what I said before, just to finish this part, because I kind of mentioned before this idea of the BRIGC, the Belt and Road Initiative International Green Development Coalition, when I was talking about the Green Silk Road. This coalition was launched back in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, during the second Belt and Road Forum. And it's supposed to be an open, inclusive network, bringing together the expertise, the environmental expertise of our partners, in order to ensure that the Belt and Road brings long-term green and sustainable development for all the concerned countries. Now, the idea is precisely that one, to integrate sustainable development, in particular sustainability, policy coordination, infrastructure, etc. So, going back to your initial question, yes, I understand that this may seem counterintuitive because there is a lot of construction involved in such a big project like the Belt and Road. But well, there is this idea of the Green Silk Road, which tries to lessen the effects of that and make it as green as possible.
There's a parallel to China's GDP growth. I think in the book, The Commanding Heights, that came out around about the time of the millennium, Daniel Yergin, the author points out that people don't appreciate fully how much China has achieved, not just on the environmental front, but on the GDP front. The achievement that China's had in such a short period of time, and also as you're bringing on the environmental front, and now with Trump in office, and how the U.S. seems to be becoming more retrograde in this area, and China's moving forward, that's really eye-opening, and it just goes to show these things can really change, and you can expect sometimes the greatest change and progress in the most unlikely places. But I think China realizes you can't underestimate the importance of green energy. It has ecological, health, GDP, resource conservation consequences for their own population. But we also have to acknowledge that green energy, it works in some places. In some places, it doesn't. I mean, and I think that's a calculus that they've done pretty shrewdly. I mean, they irrespective of what they tell their own people or what they tell the world, it seems to me that the people, the old men that run Beijing, know what's going on in the country. They have a solid grip of the facts. But of course, keeping a country of that size together is a challenge. So, talk to me about the green efficiencies and other benefits that are to be had from BRI that will have a meaningful impact on the planet's climate. And what can the BRI do to drive China's green economy forward? And if you'd like to comment, what would that mean from a regulatory or legal perspective? Will it mean some degree of legal reform?
Well, I think that first of all, before digging deeper into your question, I think that you mentioned something very interesting now. And when you talked about Trump's administration, I think that that's somewhat intertwined because we said before that 15, 20 years ago, China was perhaps not so much invested in green projects compared to other countries. In the same way that if we had a look at the global trade situation back in 2000, for example, I mean, I think globalization was clearly championed by the US and other countries in the West, whereas China, I mean, back in 2000, for example, wasn't even part of the World Trade Organization. But if you look at this right now, you look at the US, especially the new US administration trying to impose or threaten to impose tariffs, and to some extent alter or distort or change the way international trade is being done and make it all become much more multilateral rather than globalized, whereas China is advocating for globalization, etc. So in the same way that we saw the shift in trade, we, to some extent, we might in the future see this trade, when it comes to green finance, environment, etc. So you asked me now about the green efficiencies and benefits to be had. I don't know to what extent this Green Silk Road project can, impact the planet's climate. I don't have the numbers, and as far as I know, I could not find a specific number. So I don't know if it's fair to say that it will, like benefit the planet's climate as a whole. I don't know that, but one thing's for sure, and it's pretty much what I said before. The Green Silk Road aims to making the Silk Road much more sustainable, and this per se is already something meaningful because we are talking about massive projects. So if we look at these projects and we look at a project that aims to make those more efficient from a sustainable point of view, just that is already like interesting enough. And in addition to that, I think we need to put all that into the perspective, not just of China reaching carbon neutrality, as I said before, but also from the standpoint of green finance in China. No, I mean, going back to carbon neutrality, I forgot to say that experts believe that China is winning the clean energy race as well. No, because China has spent 10 times more on clean energy than either the US or Europe over the past 5 years. It dominates this rapidly growing market of renewable manufacturing, producing like, as far as I know, around 90% of solar panels, over 70% of all lithium batteries, and 65% of wind turbines, which is actually quite a lot. I think the only thing, though, is that China does things perhaps more silently, more in silence. And we saw this recently, for example, with artificial intelligence. I know this is not the core topic of our discussion, but well, we know all the fuss around AI, all these media news and even noise about anything new being created. And yet, yesterday, a few days ago, right, out of the blue, DeepSeek was launched to the public, and people started to download this app. And not talking just in China, I mean, like anywhere in the US, in Europe, and it took the world by storm. And the thing is that, I mean, how many people knew a lot about this project in advance? I mean, not many, because things are done maybe with less advertising, more. I'm not, when I say silently or quietly, I don't mean like in secret, or I mean, I'm not talking about this. It's more about not promoting so much the achievements until those achievements become a reality, perhaps. A bit less of publicity and more, well, yeah, I mean, I don't know how to put it, but I think the same idea applies perhaps to the clean energy race. Like, I bet that not many people knows about these figures that I just said, because in many people's minds, China is still the China from 2008, from the Olympics, where people saw a polluted Beijing and they thought, oh, China is just like a big factory and there is a lot of pollution. But that things have changed a lot. As you said before, China did amazing things with their GDP. China managed to reduce extreme poverty as well, like in 30 odd years. And when it comes to clean energies, carbon neutrality, clean finance,
precisely pulling 300 million people out of abject poverty. That Daniel Yergin pointed out in The Commanding Heights was a feat not achieved by anyone in mankind.
Exactly. Yes, but look at the way it was done. I mean, and I'm not criticizing anyone. It's just as a way of comparing. But I think that if we had managed to achieve something similar, let's say in Europe, I think it would have been the result of long debates, a long plan that would have been approved by several organisms.
Of course, that's the Western tradition. I mean, I'm sorry.
Exactly. I mean, and it would have been part of this bigger plan, and then another plan. And look, maybe in the end, the outcome would have been similar. I mean, I don't know, because we're talking about different situations, and we didn't face a situation recently here. But my point is that the way it's been done, well, perhaps it's been different. So, and the same idea applies to carbon neutrality, clean energy race. Not because we are not seeing big discussions on this topic in China every day. It doesn't mean that there are not projects on this. As I mentioned before, Green Belt Road, China tapping into green finance, for example, focusing on on Hong Kong. As we all know, Hong Kong is trying to strengthen its position as a green tech and green finance hub. This is not new. It's been going on for a few years, but I would say the interest is growing, and I think it's consistent with both Hong Kong's role as a global international financial center, but it's also consistent with China's sustainability goals. And then when we talk about green finance, for example, it's not just talking about sustainability. There is actually a profit to be made in green finance as well. And I think that part is interesting as well, because investors want to make profit, and then that's normal. And then talking about green finance is not talking about some kind of charitable project that will bring no return to them. Actually, the green bond market is a big market that for the past 18, 20 years, it's been growing in numbers, and green bond issuances, as you know, are becoming more regular and more meaningful. And you know that Hong Kong is thus far quite advanced when it comes to embracing the opportunities offered by green finance and green bonds. And if we put all this in the midst of China trying to become a key player in sustainability, green finance, well, I think the next years can be interesting in this area. And then recently, for example, I was reading as well, and I wrote actually a short paper about blue finance, which is a somewhat newer area, at least newer compared to green finance. As you know, blue finance is it's an emerging area. When it comes, it is similar to green finance, but applied to the seas, to the oceans, to the idea of protecting underwater environments and an investment in sustainable water economy. Of course, this is an industry that it's already moving money, but what's interesting is that China and Hong Kong are already trying to tap into this industry. Just for example, Hainan province, which makes sense, not being Hainan an island, issued blue bonds in Hong Kong back in 2022 and 23. Also, the Shenzhen municipal government issued, I think it was in total 5 billion yuan, in offshore municipal government bonds in Hong Kong back in November, I think it was 2022, including 2.6 billion yuan in green and blue bonds, which shows us that China's interest in green finance goes beyond green finance. It's reaching as well areas like blue finance. And it's affecting in a positive way Hong Kong as well, being Hong Kong an international financial center. And as you said before, it can bring regulatory challenges or opportunities, but I would say that overall this is an area full of opportunities. And I'm not meaning by that China is doing a lot in this area and others are doing nothing, or vice versa. It's just that I think this is an area in which anyone can do, and there is actually a profit to be made. And I think this is what makes all these ideas so interesting, because as I said before, when we talk about green finance, we are not just talking about which per se would be, of course, an interesting idea, making the world more sustainable and more green. But from an investor standpoint, there is also money to be made here, which is what I think makes this area more interesting to some. But in any case, I think this is an area worth exploring.
Great things are still happening in this space in China. And in the time we've got left, Oriol, is there anything you'd like to say, any last impressions you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I would just like maybe to end by saying that sometimes it's worth digging deeper, because not just 20 years ago, even now when in the West, I tell people, I was recently teaching some classes about tokenization and CBDCs, but I don't know how, when they're talking about China, was asked some questions about China and Hong Kong. When I mentioned green finance, green tech and China, people, they rolled their eyes as if I was talking about, I don't know, something very bizarre. So I think it's worth digging deeper, because a few years ago, everyone was saying that the US is going to win this AI race. But now, in one day, things seem different to many people. So in the same way that happened, I suggest people to try to dig deeper when it comes to, if they're interested, right, in green finance, especially in finance in China, the Silk Road, Green Silk Road, because there is a lot to be analyzed there. It's not always everything that's simple, but for sure there are many lessons to be learned and things to analyze.
Oriol Caudevilla, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Rajesh. It's been a pleasure.
Our next guest has a passion for languages, so much so that he's turned it into a profession, teaching people to do online open source research in languages other than English, especially in Chinese, Arabic, and Russian. Open source intelligence, often referred to by its acronym OSINT, OSINT, by intelligence, military, and law enforcement officials across the world, has made a bit of a name for itself post 9/11 through the media. And this being Hong Kong, it's something that has direct application to the legal profession, banking and financial institutions, and multinational corporations that they serve. Skip Schiphorst is a course coordinator and instructor for the Swiss-based firm iIntelligence's Arabic, Russian, and Chinese OSINT courses. He served for 17 years in the Dutch Marine Corps, the elite Naval Infantry Corps of the Royal Netherlands Navy, one of the 4 armed forces of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. While serving, he was deployed to several regions, including the Second Iraq War. Having operated in multiple theaters, his language and cultural skills were extensively used. Skip holds a university degree in Chinese studies and has a keen interest in how to incorporate languages within the OSINT spectrum. He speaks to us today from Aruba. And with that, Skip, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for this warm introduction there, AJ.
We like to start off each episode by having guests tell us a little bit about themselves, and you have quite a storied background. I mean, tell us a bit about where you're from, where you grew up, and what you can share about your background, and what will put you on the professional path that you're on.
I found myself really specializing into languages due actually by being lucky, by being exposed to many different languages at the same time from a very young age, which is a good segue into helping people understand that the best way to learn a language is growing up in languages and immersing yourself in languages. But I was exposed from a very early age to French, which is my mother tongue. I grew up in Switzerland, the west part of Switzerland. We spoke Dutch at home, French at school, international community. So English, of course, and German level at school. Spent some time in Switzerland until I was 18 years old. Very, very happy to have done so. Very glad that I was given a chance to live in an idyllic town of 40. Some people say 40,000, but I have to correct them and say no, just 40, sometimes 45 people. So a pretty idyllic situation there, lots of times outside. But that was starting to get a bit boring for me. I had too much energy and couldn't canalize that. So I decided to serve, did that for about 17 years in Dutch Marine Corps, primarily in infantry units, airborne units, and long-range reconnaissance units. And throughout my my deployments and trainings throughout the world, was able to use my passion for languages, self-taught myself Arabic, was able to use that when operations started kicking off in the Middle East. That was super useful, really very, very beneficial to use that instead of going through an interpreter, just getting leveling with people and just getting so much more information. Even if it's not perfect, I was able to really level and get just a tidbit of more human communication going, which really helped with getting a bit more, knowing more things about the region, I guess. I'll keep it short. I would have continued doing this work because I really enjoyed doing what I was doing. My last job in the Marines was being a squad leader. I really liked that, having lots of flexibility. My last specialty was jungle warfare instructor, which was very fun, and now pivoted from jungle warfare into cyber jungle, so to speak. My profession ended after a little speed bump at work. I got injured, and then I went to university. I had a passion for languages, and I thought I'd tackle a new one, so I went for Chinese. I studied that for 3 years at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands. I was very fortunate enough to study as well in China and study as well in Taiwan. And it's actually during my studies that I figured out that there's this thing called OSINT. I was just calling it, as most people, Googling in foreign languages. I had to write reports in Dutch and English, essays, etc. And then I had to start writing them as well in Chinese. And that's where I thought, hey, hang on a minute, there might be something interesting here. And then specialized into that and made that my specialty, actually. Very fortunate to have got in contact with the company I work for presently, iIntelligence. I've been with them for 5 years, and it's been a blast combining my passion for languages together with all my research.
You know, it's often said that in the run up to 9/11, they didn't have enough, certainly the Americans and perhaps to a lesser extent the British, experts in Middle Eastern languages, particularly Arabic. And now the focus is somewhat shifted past the Arab world, more so to Iran. But certainly they were well stocked up on Chinese language speakers from the Cold War days when, you know, watching what Beijing and Moscow were doing was key. And so they had enough speakers in the pipeline for the future for those two languages. But Arabic was in short supply, certainly in the early years. And I was just wondering what compelled you to go down that route? I mean, it's literally a level 5 language. It's up there with Mandarin.
Yeah, no, it's not an easy one. There's some easy parts with Arabic. It's got an alphabet, which makes it super easy to read and write.
There's the language of Egypt, which was popularized by Egyptian cinema, which is pretty much understood all throughout the Arab and Islam, Middle Eastern world writ large. But I believe you have to be cautious about, because there's the Lebanese, Syrian type of Arabic, and then there's the Arabic of the Quran. And
there's just like so many different languages. There's going to be lots of different dialects and accents and words that are not interchangeable. So I learned MSA, which was pretty much the media Arabic. And when I was in certain places like Iraq or Morocco, whatever place, or Egypt as well with work, I would then have, or just learn on the go, learn new words. I got to say, to answer your question, this was pre 9/11. I joined in 97, and between exercises and deployments, you always have some time for yourself, and thought I'd learn another language. So I thought, hey, might as well just choose a difficult one. So I thought about Hebrew, Russian, Chinese, or Arabic, and I thought, I'll go for Arabic. So I literally had, this was pre-internet or pre-mobile phone, so I had a book in a Ziploc bag in my backpack anywhere I went and used that book in my hammocks in the jungle or in my tent in Norway in the evenings to read and just use that. And then everything happened after 9/11. I was able to use that to my advantage. But I gotta say, in 3 years of self-studies, my Arabic was very poor until I went to Iraq, and that's where I was able to use it on a daily basis. That really ties into my theory of the best way to learn a language is really immersion and just being exposed to it the whole time. My Arabic is very poor now, but it's good enough that I can explain in English how to use it online.
I can imagine. Being on the ground in the thick of it, in some cases, perhaps even some might say those language skills would help keep one alive. Being on those kinds of direct action type missions, seeing combat, what was, to the extent you can convey it to a public that will never have those kinds of experience?
Absolutely.
What was that like? How did that change you? To what extent did it shape your outlook on life as of right now?
Yeah, sure. I don't mind. So the full disclosure, I have not had nearly as much action or even a little action compared to some of my colleagues who've served in Iraq and Afghanistan as well, especially Afghanistan, where it was extremely kinetic. My job was working as a point man in a reconnaissance platoon. So our job was not to be seen and just report on things and go in, look at things, report, and go outside, go back without being seen in 6-man or 8-man teams. The whole crust of it was just not being seen. So it was, if it would have been kinetic, that means something would have been gone horribly wrong. But that didn't happen. It was lots of observations for long days and long nights as well. So that's what I did. But I was able to use a lot of language skills there. It's Dutch people in general are pretty well known to be able to communicate in English, which is very useful. But it also comes with the flip side. It means that we often think, especially in the military in the Netherlands and other countries which also speak English, that we can get anything done anywhere if we just speak English. To an extent, that's very true. But it also means that you have to hire local translators and talk to them into English, which really constructs a barrier whenever you're speaking to people. So the jobs I had, the things we did in Iraq were at night or during a couple of days in a row, observe without being seen. We weren't doing that. We were going over, interviewing people and talking to people and just having conversations with people. And whenever these conversations would go through an interpreter, sometimes it wouldn't be very well translated. It was difficult for me to pick up because my Arabic was not so good. But more importantly, you would get much more rapport if you're speaking to a tribe elder or the mayor of a small town. Even if my Arabic was horrible, you could see that you would have that human contact, and they would see, oh, here's a guy who can say more than hello, goodbye, peace be upon you, right? Somebody has made an effort to actually talk a bit, even if his grammar and pronunciation is really off the bat. Somebody tried, and you would get more information. I've got a cool anecdote on this if you're interested. Before we went to a small town, a patrol went there from other company, and they came back with information saying, yeah, there's nothing to report. And we went back there a few weeks later or a month later or something. And I was asked, are you confident enough to do this by yourself, or you want to take a translator? So I thought, yeah, I might just go, I might just not take the translator and just go for it. And we went there, talked to the same people, and then they said, oh yeah, by the way, on your way back out, don't drive where you drove, because that's mined and there's unexploded ordnance. And if you're interested, right behind the village, there's a mass grave. You might want to check that out. So just goes to show that you just get more information if you try and make a bit of effort to level with people.
Oh, for sure. I mean, in terms of winning the hearts and minds and building goodwill, and then I'm glad you distinguished the kinetic aspects. I mean, remember one of my professors in law school, who was U.S. Marine Corps reservist, and after Iraq, he resigned his commission, I believe. He said, the thing about it was there was a kinetic side, there was a tactical side, there was a strategic side, there was a political side, and winning every engagement will not win the war, he said, and
Absolutely.
that state will ended up being pretty prescient in terms of the 2008 election, Obama's election, the withdrawal and the return of U.S. forces.
I was very happy to go. Don't get me wrong, right, AJ? I was very happy to go. I was 23 years old. I was very happy to go on operations with the guys I trained with for years. So that was really, really very cool to do. But at some point, I started questioning myself, hey, why am I here? I'm happy to be here. I'm doing really interesting stuff with the people I will do everything for. But why am I exactly here? So, and that's a question I started asking myself a few weeks or a few months in. So there we go.
So experience clearly changes one's outlook.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it's the job of people in the field. As I said, I was a Marine first class by then. My job was not to what's it called, to push policy or drive policy. My job was to stay alive and have the people around me stay alive and come out in one piece. That was my job. If you want to change things, if I wanted to have things changed, I should have probably studied politics or get into politics and stuff like that. So I accepted that. And,
well, there's that line from the poem "Charge the Light Brigade." I think it's by Tennyson. there's not to make reply, there's not to question why, there's but to do and die. It's just pretty bleak. But yeah, I mean, as you're saying, it's not the the executive proposes, the military disposes. The rank and file don't make policies. So
Precisely. I think it's all good. You can set that aside if you know you're being sent over to do things and that you trust the people that send you over. This was not, for me, not super visible in the in some of the places I went. It was very visible when we did humanitarian aid in the Caribbean when an earthquake hit, or when we went over to Honduras and Nicaragua to help out with a hurricane in 1998. Then you can really directly see the things you do. They really translate into tangible things that do well. Not kinetic at all, but very visible and tangible.
So I can definitely see the applications of what would you do. I mean, you mentioned to me that it's easy to navigate the internet in Chinese, that it's way easier than English due to the simplicity of language. That's interesting because, I mean, certainly in the regulatory space, when it comes to legal and compliance, oftentimes, say, a Chinese regulator like the CSRC or the People's Bank of China will issue something, and it's hard for English speakers to get a hold of because that document's often in Chinese. And so a lot of things don't pop up on the radar of those that are looking for things in English, and they don't always provide translation. And so there's a sense that because of that language capacity, that a lot of direct market information, official pronouncement, a lot of market intelligence is just slipping through the nets, that outsiders are not being kept in the loop. And it's the same in the Middle East, that not only you dealing with the language factor, but in some cases, the information is only shared with select market players.
Precisely. In my opinion, what I've seen in the last few years is that it really comes back to keywords, right? Applying those correctly in a browser is something we really hammer in our courses, whether they're the Russian, Chinese, or Arabic courses, really emphasizing the importance of selecting the right keywords. Now, if you and I, AJ, we speak English and we have to research something together about, for example, I don't know, outlaw motor gangs on the East Coast of the US, you and I are going to have our list of keywords ready within a few minutes, right? OMG, outlaw motor gang, etc. You name it. We'll have our keywords ready, stacked up. It's
because some knowledge of the subject matter, more so than the average person,
absolutely
gives us the ability to know what to search for.
Absolutely. You have an advantage if you studied a foreign language. You definitely have an advantage, but some organizations don't always have the luxury of having a native speaker. Now, coming back to what I was saying, it really comes to being sure that you use the right keywords. AI can help, but I always tell people, don't put all your eggs into the AI basket, right? There's nothing wrong. It's actually good if you spend time being critical about the keywords you think you find, right? Some about organizations, for example. Be sure you've got the right one. Don't use names that have been used 10, 20 years ago, or doctrine, etc., in different languages, right? You have to, just like cooking, you need to find the right ingredients and cook them at the right temperature. Now, you mentioned Chinese. You mentioned it. I mentioned that Chinese was easy to search in. Out of the three languages, I would gather that Chinese would be one of the easiest languages to search in online due to the simplicity of the language. Now, people who are listening to this are going to envision these characters and are going to think there is nothing easy about those things. They don't look like anything that they're used to, right? And I get that, but they don't change, right? The characters are characters. Sometimes simplified, sometimes traditional, but they don't change. The grammar doesn't change. The structure doesn't change, right? Whether it's a plural, etc., or with verbs, etc., they don't change. So that really helps in searching online easier, right? If you search online in languages that look similar to English, for example, Italian, which I don't speak, or French, or a German, or a Dutch, right? Or even English for foreigners, the way you search and change your search strings, the grammar you use, conjugation, verbs, really affect your results, right? And that's not something that has a lot of effect on Chinese. If you got the right keywords in Chinese and you use your operators correctly and you use a critical mindset of analytical searches, you will find a lot of information out there. Typically, people in organizations, whether it's law enforcement, journalists, academics, are going to pivot to a native speaker because they think, it's Russian, I'm not going to do it. Or, oh, hey, stop, I'm not going to do Arabic or Chinese, I'll just outsource it, right? Or they'll just pivot to Google Translate and Google Lens, which are really great tools. I mean, let's be honest, HA, compared to 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the times we live in are really amazing in terms of what we can find, right? But we still have to be critical, especially as online researchers. We have to be critical to not just put all our eggs into the Google Translate basket and the AI basket. That's my theory.
I like your point about saying how you search affects your search strings. I mean, because on a practical level, most people, and again, it comes down to how savvy of an online desk researcher one is using public domain sources, that most people, I think, can understand how to use a search engine and do a natural language search by using certain key terms. But how many people realize that by putting double quotation marks around certain key terms, that you merge the terms together and you're forcing the engine to search for terms within a certain space within the same sentence of each other, thereby narrowing your searches. And again,
Precisely.
beyond just the language factor, it's how good are you at searching for things in your own language?
Well, there it is, right? It's not because we speak a language that we're also able to search in that language. You mentioned the quotation marks. I wish I would have known about these when I was researching or studying at university, right? Like I said, I was an old dude when I went to university. If I would have known a couple of these operators, like quotation marks or file type PDF, if I would have known those, that would have helped me so much find better information and get higher grades, right? But yeah, there you go. Which ties into the actually course I'm building right now. Pretty passionate about something new about helping academics research online, really focusing on the basics, things that would have helped me. But luckily, I am seeing also in different countries that this is also being taught in high schools. It's not just turning on your computer and how to turn it off. It's also using operators. I see this in some countries. It's encouraging to see.
Well, for me, I mean, the realization only dawned on me when I had to take legal research in for my first term in law school, August, September 99.
I can imagine.
And again, the results you would get way more than you needed. A lot of it was irrelevant if you did a natural language search. Some of it obviously was applicable to the task at hand. Some of it was germane, but then if you knew how to do a terms and connectors search, though, which was tougher, it required more effort, more thought being put into your terms and how you put the string together. But when you did a Boolean search, that the level of precision, again, it came down to how much effort you put into it, but the level of precision, sometimes you could be too precise.
Right.
But the level of precision, level of relevancy was markedly different. And again, it came down to how much thought did you put into a search. That's why I can understand why people are saying AI is making people lazy, because that sense of discernment is being delegated to the machine.
You nailed it, AJ. I'm glad you mentioned that, because sometimes being too precise is not what you want, right? Especially if you're looking for a person, then you want to be precise. But if you're looking for news sources to write better reports or findings or studies, then ending with one or two results is not typically what you want. Also, you don't want to end up with 4 or 5 million results, right? If you end up on your phone, it's all about finding that sweet spot, about being a bit more flexible with your research, and then ending up with the right amount of results, which is gonna help you a lot. Something we focus on a lot. You just mentioned AI again. Many of my colleagues, including myself, to an extent, when AI came over, many of us said, "Well, that's it. That's the end of of teaching OSINT, right? But I would say absolutely not. It's definitely a very powerful tool to use in your research. And just to explain why we think that precise searches are just as important, if not more important than AI, is in our courses. They're all 5 sessions of 3.5 hours. On the last session, we don't teach anything. We just do 3.5 hours of exercises. For 4 days, we've taught them how to research everything in different languages. And on the 5th day, we just throw them to the lions with find this document, find this news source, find this email address, find this person, etc., geolocating, etc. Now, in the group, we're blessed with native speakers. We're blessed with a lot of people that have never spoken Chinese, Russian, or Arabic. And we also have some people sometimes that rely completely on AI. I once invited someone on session number 5, which is 3.5 hours of training exercises, and I asked that person, just use AI, right? I also invited a native speaker without having followed our course. And of course, on that day 5, where I also had about 5 or 6 participants who don't speak, I think it was Chinese, but went through the training course, right? And in many cases, they were able to find more accurate information faster than the gentleman that used AI, and faster than some of the native speakers, which for us is really cool to see. That really means that they're getting it. We're blessed with the really cool participants that are super keen to learn. So it's very enjoyable to see how fast people can nail that.
Hey, I mean, that's what I like to hear. I mean, it's good to know that sometimes you can figure out cheat codes to work smart. But I mean, if we were to distill it down, it seems like there are 3 things, there are 3 prongs: knowledge of the language, knowledge of the subject matter, and just knowing how to search, knowing how to be a good researcher. And clearly, it's best if you bone up on all 3.
Yes.
But it's difficult, especially knowledge of the subject matter. Well, I'm sorry, especially knowledge of the language, because I think many people have phobias about languages past a certain age. Others embrace with an open mind, open heart, because it's also about learning about a different culture. But there's those 3 things. And you know, the thing about Chinese, I kind of feel as though us non-Chinese speakers, because in that culture they've been exposed to however many hundreds or thousands of characters, the very least hundreds of characters they've learned since birth, it's always going to be easier for them to learn English than for us to learn Chinese.
To an extent, I agree with you. It's not a difficult language. It's way easier than Arabic and French and other languages, I would say.
Because because the structure, and I hear that.
Absolutely.
I hear that about German too, that English people are surprised that because English is a hodgepodge of
It's difficult.
Germanic and Latin and Latin, Norman, French, and so it's a hodgepodge language, and that's why so much is counterintuitive.
Like AJ, you and I, we speak English. It's we don't have to think about what we say, but it's always very impressive when you meet a foreigner that nails English, which is not an easy language with verbs when we think of it. But we grew up with it.
Yeah, if you're learning it formally, correct.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. But even casually, I mean, YouTube videos help if you grew up in it. Chinese, on the other hand, is I would gather if an adult person that doesn't speak English or Chinese, right? If they choose to study Chinese, my guess is that will be easier to learn than English. Just I'll give you one example, or you actually mentioned one, right? Because of the syntax, right? I'll give another example. Verbs in Chinese are fairly easy, right? I was lucky to grow up in French around me, so I was able to nail my verbs by speaking, but by writing, it is difficult, right? Or think about German or Arabic verbs. Those are very difficult to master, right? And in Chinese, it's relatively easy. There's no conjugations to an extent. It's which makes it easy to search in because you just use that character and it's not going to change with plural, singular, past, etc., etc.
You know, so someone who shaped my thinking on OSINT is my friend Malcolm Nance. He's a former naval intelligence officer and former cryptographer, and his claim to fame is all the books he wrote on the Russian hacking in the 2016 election. But I can definitely see the relevance of what you're doing in the, especially in the cross-border due diligence M&A context. Background searches and certainly in terms of KYC, AML, counterterrorism financing, in terms of banks wanting to know who is this person. They delve into the background. They're searching for documents in a foreign locale, foreign language. Yeah, I mean, multiple applications to what you do. I guess what I'm wondering is in the time we've got left, is there anything remaining that you'd like to say to our audience on this topic?
No, two things. Actually, I'd like to jump into what you said because at the end, being applicable to KYC, AML, and other researches, many people think of OSINT or open source intelligence as being something that is only used for military or law enforcement purposes. Right? When people think about OSINT, they think about people that go on Twitter and find tanks driving around, etc. Yeah, you can use OSINT for that. You can also use OSINT to write a very good essay for your studies or find that right bakery, right? You can apply to many different things. There's, of course, a difference between open source information, which is just finding information, and open source intelligence, which is combining information and making that into a product which you can use to make sound decisions, whether they're law enforcement driven, whether they're corporate due diligence driven, or journalistic or academic, you name it. That was one point I wanted to say. The other point is that I'm always happy to tell listeners that in case there's some young listeners here who are tight on the budget, about once or twice a year, we give free introductions on how to research online in Arabic, Chinese, and Russian. And if people are interested in joining that and getting some free skills, right, they can always reach out to me. I'm very OSINTable on LinkedIn and Twitter, and they can reach out. I'm more than happy to help young people.
Years ago, I remember Peter Goloff, former British Army intelligence officer, telling me that, this is for an article I was writing for Secure, the now defunct publication Security Hong Kong, published by the late Robert Houston, Diamond Sky Publishing, that the crux of the article was all too often businesses think, okay, I need information on something. I need to go to a corporate investigations firm that think of Kroll or Control Risks or FTI Consulting or Navigant or Proactivity or Nardell & Co. or Mintz Group, or, a firm of that nature. And his point was, search in the public domain for the best of your ability, and then you spend money when you exhausted that. And I think what you're doing would certainly help a lot of firms save money if they could build that feature, inculcate those skills in-house amongst their staff.
Absolutely.
And then only when that fails, you go running to the professionals.
Right, because it's all about saving time, right? And money to an extent. And the best things we get as feedback is the direct feedback, but it's also the feedback we get after a few weeks or even a year after we ran courses for companies, organizations in-house, telling me or telling us, hey, about that course, thanks, we were able to find a missing person, or we were able to bust what was the last one we got about human trafficking ring, things like that. That really means a lot to us. We love hearing that kind of feedback.
Well, Skip Schiphorst, thank you so much for your time.
It was an absolute pleasure, AJ. Thanks so much for this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Have to come back again sometime. And to our listeners, thank you. Until next time.